History remembers steel, coal, and oil because they made empires visible. The 21st century runs on something you almost never see: the rare earth elements and permanent magnets hidden inside electric motors, wind turbines, smartphones, data center drives, precision missiles, and fighter jets. Strip away the speeches and the slogans, and what you're left with is chemistry, process know-how, and a supply chain that one country, China, spent decades building end to end. America still leads in software, chips, and weapon systems, but the torque, guidance, and actuation that make those systems move depend on materials the US largely doesn't refine or magnetize at home. That is why the rare earth race is no longer a subplot of globalization. It is the plot. Start with a simple image: one mine in California and a handful of refineries in China moving in opposite directions for 30 years. In the 1980s and early 1990s, the US dominated upstream with the Mountain Pass mine feeding global demand for lanthanum, cerium, neodymium, and praseodymium. But Washington treated rare earths like any other commodity. Price first, environment later, and the hard, messy middle of the chain, separation chemistry, quietly migrated to China. Beijing bet the future on mastering the dirtiest, most complex part of the business: hundreds of iterative solvent extraction steps, waste handling, and the proprietary flow sheets that turn mixed concentrates into discrete oxides. It subsidized the industry, accepted environmental burdens others wouldn't, and linked materials to domestic manufacturing. America allowed Mountain Pass to wither. China scaled refineries and magnet shops across Inner Mongolia and the south. By 2010, China did not just mine more. It refined roughly 9 out of every 10 tons and produced nearly all high-performance, rare earth magnets. When a maritime clash with Japan erupted around the Senkaku/Diaoyu Islands, Beijing demonstrated what leverage looks like in the age of supply chains. It choked rare earth exports to Tokyo. Prices spiked, assembly lines stalled, and Washington, Brussels, and Tokyo took the fight to the WTO. The rules-based system eventually forced China to drop formal quotas in 2015, but the legal victory did not dissolve industrial reality. The engineering talent, process IP, and supplier webs stayed in China. The choke point became structural. Control the chemistry, and you control the future applications. Consolidation was the next move. Beijing reorganized the sector around two state champions, Northern Rare Earth and China Rare Earth Group, that sit astride mining, smelting/separation, and the magnet value chain. Quotas became a dial, not a ban. Tightened to support price or send a signal, loosened to starve would-be rivals of margins. Meanwhile, the downstream fuse was lit as EVs, drones, and wind turbines multiplied. By the mid-2020s, analysts put China's global shares at approximately 69% of mining, approximately 92% of refining, and approximately 98% of magnet production. Tiny market in dollars, massive in consequences. If a material worth a few $billion can stall industries worth trillions, that's not a commodity, that's a lever. The United States finally felt that lever in a very personal way: the F-35. In 2022, deliveries of America's fifth-generation fighter paused when auditors found a Chinese-origin alloy in a turbomachine magnet. No safety risk, but a compliance crisis. Production resumed under waiver, and the Pentagon began hard-coding the lesson into procurement law. The issue was never one magnet. It was the revelation that Chinese materials had seeped into the world's most sophisticated supply chains. If the 2010 episode was a warning shot, the 2020s are the artillery duel. Beijing broadened its toolkit beyond rare earths, imposing export licensing first on gallium and germanium, key to RF and optoelectronics, and then on graphite, critical to EV anodes. The legal language was familiar: national security, dual use, global norms. But the practical effect was tighter Chinese visibility and veto power over what leaves the country and how it's used. By 2025, China extended controls deeper into rare earth elements, magnets, and even associated technologies, adding end-use tests and lists of refining steps and equipment that would now require licenses. In other words, the rules reached not just the metal, but the know-how. There was also turbulence upstream. China's heavy rare earth stream, especially dysprosium and terbium, which help magnets keep strength at high temperatures, leans on Myanmar's ionic clay deposits. In late 2024 and into 2025, fighting in Kachin and other northern regions disrupted mining and cross-border flows. Chinese imports of Myanmar REE feedstock plunged at points, an 89% year-over-year drop in 1 month, tightening the very inputs that sustain Chinese refineries and raising prices for terbium. Beijing responded as you would expect a system architect to respond, by tightening quota discipline, reshaping control of mining zones via proxies, and exploring alternative supplies, all while moving to make third-country users of Chinese materials subject to Chinese law. Volatility, in short, became part of the strategy. America's counter is blunt. Rebuild the entire chain at home and with allies. Mine, separate, metal, magnet, motor, and hard fence defense. The policy plumbing is now in place. The Department of Defense finalized rules that, effective January 1, 2027, will bar Chinese origin rare earth magnets and metals from U.S. weapons systems across the entire upstream. Mining, refining, separation, metal, and finished magnet. That is not a gentle nudge, it is a full supply chain reroute on a deadline. In parallel, DoD has poured greater than $439 million since 2020 into mine-to-magnet programs and set a goal in its 2024 National Defense Industrial Strategy to meet all defense magnet needs with a domestic or allied chain by 2027. Industry is beginning to answer. MP Materials restarted separation at Mountain Pass and switched on U.S. magnet production in Fort Worth, Texas, with initial output aimed at GM and other OEMs. 2024 saw record Mountain Pass concentrate and NdPr oxide production. 2025 brought the first 1,000-ton per year magnet capacity and a series of headline deals. A multi-billion-dollar DoD financing package targeting 10,000 tons per year of magnets across 2 U.S. plants, and long-term offtakes with both Detroit and Silicon Valley. What matters here is not the press release but the physics. Magnets, strip-cast, hot-pressed, graded, and coated inside the U.S. at growing volume. Yet the rebuild is fragile because the economics are fragile. Chinese producers can swing quotas and undercut prices to make new Western projects uneconomic. That's why Pentagon contracts now include guaranteed floor prices and equity stakes, policy designed to survive a pricing war. It's also why Washington ties magnet rules to origin through the entire chain. Under the updated DFARS clause, sourcing cobalt or samarium in China and melting in America will still fail compliance after 2027. The loopholes are closing by design. None of this occurs in a vacuum. The rare earth contest sits in a larger U.S. dash. China sanctions and controls chess match around semiconductors and advanced manufacturing. America's entity lists and chip export rules target Chinese AI and lithography ambitions. Beijing's responses target the upstream materials and midstream processes the West needs for electrification and defense. The result is symmetry. Washington polices who can buy advanced tools and chips. Beijing polices who can buy critical materials and the recipes to use them. Either side can escalate without a single ship moving in the Taiwan Strait. What does this mean for real American industries? In autos, there's a live debate over motor architectures, induction or ferrite-assisted to reduce or eliminate NdFeB magnets versus magnet motors for compactness and efficiency. In defense, compliance clocks are already ticking. Primes are auditing Tier 3 and Tier 4 suppliers for magnet origin, because the rule covers the entire upstream, not just where a magnet was pressed. In energy, wind turbine builders are balancing nacelle size and serviceability against magnet intensity and supply risk. And across all sectors, CFOs have learned the 2025 lesson. A small market in dollars can be a big market in risk. Goldman Sachs recently quantified that a 10% rare earth disruption could erase $150 billion in global output. That's enough to move equities and election narratives at the same time. The next 5 years will be decided less by slogans than by flow sheets and furnaces. For China, the plan is continuity with refinements. Keep separation and magnet production overwhelmingly domestic. Extend legal control beyond oxides into technologies, tooling, and end use. Maintain quota opacity through the two-state champions to stabilize domestic margins and set global price signals. And secure heavy rare earth feedstock via Myanmar and diversified channels, with sufficient redundancy to ride out insurgencies and sanctions alike. Control the process knowledge and you control the bottleneck even when rock and scrap shift hands. For America, the plan is volume plus verification. Volume, meaning multiple magnet plants and allied separation lines so that a Pentagon purchase order, a Detroit platform cycle, or a federal offshore wind round does not hinge on a single campus. Verification, meaning traceability from mine, or recycling stream, to pressed magnet to motor, documented well enough to pass a DFARS audit in 2027 and withstand litigation. The Department of Defense's money is not merely subsidy, it is a price stability instrument designed to make Western plants bankable through a Chinese price cycle. It is also a signal to capital markets that magnets have become a national security product. Now set those strategies against 3 realistic futures. America and China must price in a managed bifurcation in which two interoperable but distinct ecosystems form: a U.S. allied chain that covers defense and a large chunk of EV demand, and a China-centric chain that remains the low-cost, high-volume supplier to much of the global south and to Western OEMs that prioritize price. In this world, Beijing keeps leverage but loses veto power. Washington pays a premium for resilience but gets what it needs. Markers: steady ramp in U.S. magnet tonnage, European processing at Solvay-La Rochelle reaching meaningful scale, and a compliance regime that the primes actually meet without schedule slips. A control spiral in which each side adds frictions faster than industry can reroute. China lengthens licensing timelines and expands lists of covered REE technologies and alloys. The U.S. tightens chip and investment rules and pushes third countries to align. Myanmar conflict or border shutdowns hit heavy RE feed. Prices spike. Projects that looked bankable on slide decks struggle to raise capital. Political calendars on both sides reward escalation. The biggest loser in this world is predictability. The biggest winner is the incumbent with sunk engineering capital: China. Recent moves by Beijing to add elements and magnet tech to control lists show how quickly this can happen. A technology pivot in which serious magnet recycling scales and automakers diversify motor designs enough to reduce dysprosium/terbium intensity, blunting China's heaviest choke point. Europe's circular push accelerates. U.S. e-waste and end-of-life motors become a meaningful urban mine. China would still dominate, but the economics of absolute dependency would soften. This is the slowest of the three paths, but it's the one most investors underestimate because it lives in materials science, not headlines. This scenario is already implicit in EU policy milestones and in U.S. industrial plans that pair primary production with recycling build-outs. Whichever path we take, the meaning for China is straightforward. It has built the pre-silicon choke point of the clean energy and defense age. Even if non-Chinese mining grows, the chemical middle and magnet finishing are still in China's house, defended not just by cost but by cumulative know-how and now by law. Rare earths have become the quiet equalizer against U.S. technology controls. Every time Washington limits Chinese access to advanced lithography, Beijing can tighten screws on the materials that make Western hardware roll, spin, and steer. The risk for China is overshooting. Curbs that are too aggressive could accelerate Western build-outs and invite coordinated counter-subsidies. So far, Beijing has calibrated, measured pressure, reversible dials. For the United States, the meaning is more urgent. America has rediscovered that supply chain isn't a buzzword. It's a machine room with pipes and pressures you can literally touch. The DFARS clock to 2027 is forcing design changes and new vendor ecosystems. The DoD and big OEMs are now effectively anchor tenants underwriting a domestic magnet industry. Success looks pragmatic, not perfect. 10,000 tons per year of magnets across 2 or more U.S. plants. Mountain Pass and allied separators pushing reliable NdPr oxide. Audited traceability that satisfies program managers and inspectors general, and a policy mix that keeps plants alive through the next Chinese price cycle. Failure looks like compliance waivers, blown schedules, and a return to the old habit of hoping the market will solve a national security externality. The stakes are not just economic, they are doctrinal. America's defense and energy transition should not hinge on another country's export portal. And this contest has already crossed the line from economics to policy confrontation. The United States has layered entity list designations and technology controls across swaths of Chinese industry. China has replied with export licensing on gallium/germanium, graphite, and now rare earths and magnet tech, plus tightened quota discipline at home and in-the-field influence over Myanmar feed. Sanctions and counter-sanctions are no longer symbolic gestures. They are production schedules moving up or down. Each new rule lands like a torque wrench in somebody's factory. If you want a single indicator to watch from here, watch where the magnets are made. Not concentrates, not oxides. Magnets. The IEA's latest chart puts China's share of rare earth magnet production for 2024 at overwhelming levels. Reuters' recent tallies echo that greater than 90% magnet dominance and greater than 90% refining. Until those needles move, policy speeches will outrun physical reality. When they move, when U.S. tonnage climbs from the hundreds to the thousands and European lines like La Rochelle turn into a network, you'll know the supply chain itself has finally shifted. Power doesn't always look like a carrier strike group or a chip fab. Sometimes it looks like a solvent extraction cascade humming in a building no tourist will ever visit, or a strip casting line turning powders into magnets by the ton. China understood that early and built an empire of process. America is rebuilding, faster than skeptics predicted, but against a clock and an opponent that controls the middle of the chain and the rules that govern it. The next decade will be decided in those machine rooms, in the chemistry that turns rocks and scrap into momentum. If the 20th century crowned the nations that owned oil and silicon, the 21st will reward the nations that own the magnets. And right now, that makes the magnet war the quietest and most decisive contest on Earth.